try to arrive at a balanced budget. And there's a couple of ways we can go about this. We don't have to raise taxes at all if we prioritize some things that are already in the budget. That would take some little bit of studying, but that's one way of approaching it. What I would like to do is go around the table here, and what we need to do is establish what our priorities are and then see how we can fund them. Kyle, you want to lead us off?
Well, Mr. Chairman, my priorities for this upcoming budget, my priorities is to maintain a property tax rate of 70 cents per $100. I want to also look at the possible revenues coming into the county, and we see a sheet of what is mandated and what is optional. I think that we have a duty to our residents to be fiscal responsible, which I think we have been in this county as compared to other counties. But my goal is to do our best to try to offset some of the proposed tax increases in the manager's budget.
Okay. Now, from going through the proposed budget, is there anything that you think needs to have more emphasis put on it and less some other places? I see you got a lot of sticky notes.
I do, Mr. Chairman. I do. Couple of questions. So we had the CIP plan, which was what I look at is there's the possibility of an increased revenue possibly coming into the county in the very near future. I know we can't plan on that for this year, but we know there's a possibility of that of a increased revenue source coming into the county. So one thing is, if we are potentially committed to that revenue source, do we go ahead and pay for everything now that's in the proposed budget versus waiting a year until some of that revenue starts trickling in? One question with the county manager, and let me get to my stick. Heidi, I noticed, this is on page 32, gentlemen, the occupancy taxes, the fiscal actual was at 294, and we adopted 210 in the previous budget, and your recommended budget is only 250,000, and our actual is at 294. That's a difference of $44,000. And I was just curious, are you just being very conservative with that number?
Yep.
Which line item was that?
It's
It's occupancy taxes.
Oh, okay.
So occupancy taxes, we get to retain 3% of those, but then all of that goes to the TDA.
Okay. Is that, okay. All right, and Heidi, I also noticed this is the interest earnings for the county. I see you've got quite a significant increase there of $386,000. That's just from the.
We've had a good year on the interest earnings. They've come in strong.
Okay.
And so we had, in the current year, used some of the interest earnings to help offset the EMS budget deficit, and we appropriated some of those mid-year. So we've had, going on almost 2 years now of strong interest earnings, so that's why that number is looking stronger than it has in the past.
You know what the year-to-date figure is?
Yeah. Can y'all pull that up for me? we were projecting it to grow from 100,000 to 495,000 on the revenue projection for next year.
I'd be reticent to make any adjustments to that because
We don't know.
the feds are talking about, or they're thinking the feds are gonna actually cut the rates, this year and soon because of the China-US trade war and to sort of help the economy. So I would be reticent
To appropriate
appropriate
that.
more because, if that happens, then our interest earnings will likely go
Plummet.
down.
Well, I'm like Kyle, I wanna know how you gonna earn that.
That was my.
So our current year collections are 435,532.
All right, now that's on a balance of, average balance of what fund balance? What kind of money is drawing that kind of interest? And,
Those are all, that interest is being earned on, all the funds that we have in the general fund, any, special revenue funds. I mean, those are just generated off of the funds that we have in place.
all right, to get to that, if we went with this proposed budget and we spend $5 million of that amount that's drawing interest, are we still gonna achieve this 486?
It's possible because if.
I don't want possible. Is it realistic to expect that we're gonna make that much interest if we spend $5 million to pay as we go on the hangar and whatever else we got budgeted?
It just depends on what other things happen. If you have, say, if you decide to do any debt next year for schools, the debt proceeds come in and you actually earn interest on that money. So it could offset any big expenditures we have such as the hangar. So I feel comfortable. I feel like that's a very conservative estimate, even if the feds go in and cut rates, even with the hangar. I feel like that's very conservative, but if you all, feel like that we need to adjust that down, we can.
Well, I don't know what we need to do with it, but we do need to feel comfortable with it.
Hattie, planning and zoning fees, our actual was at 45,000 and we only budgeted for 32,000. That's a $13,000 difference. Do you, being that there was presidents the previous year and the economy is growing, do you feel that's a justified amount, or?
I mean, Commissioners, you're familiar with our budgeting. We budget conservatively to help grow you a fund balance. This is.
I'm not putting you on the
how we're-
spot here.
Right.
I'm just asking.
It's a budget, right? It's a projection. If y'all
Mhm.
want to make some adjustments to that, we can.
Mhm.
If you're not comfortable with it being as conservative as we're recommending it to be, then we can make those adjustments. But yes, these are the recommended amounts for what we felt comfortable getting us to a place.
We took your recommendations last year and we closed 2.2 million in the fund balance afterwards. So I don't see the issue of accepting their projections this year. I mean,
I'm not saying that the projections are wrong. I'm just saying there's always, it's conservative and.
Sure, it
and
is.
And it's conservative and we're talking about raising taxes and so
Sure.
I'm just
Sure.
being realistic here.
All these numbers are floating figures.
Yeah, floating figures.
Absolutely.
They're floating figures, but, one question, this is, what's officers' fees on page 33? I was just curious about that.
Court officers, I believe. It comes from
I think that's when they have to go serve.
the
uh,
magistrates.
Yeah, civil summons. is
Civil
what that is.
summons.
There's a fee associated with the summons and when they send.
Okay,
officers
all right.
out.
I was curious what that.
Great question.
State reimbursement for inmates. We were at 316,000, actual and budgeted for 260. That's a difference of $56,000. Again, Heidi's estimate, but if we're looking to adjust, that's a possibility right there.
Now, along those lines, how much do we get paid, reimbursed on a daily basis?
I'm gonna need them to pull up the state inmates.
I'm not that number right off the bat. That's something that the sheriff's office tends to, they give us that projection based on the number of state inmates they have, based on the fee structure from the state, so.
There's also, in past years when we've had discussions with the sheriff about revenue sources, there are certain legislative requirements or state policies that sometimes come into play that make our jail not a suitable place to place inmates, state inmates. So the sheriff likes to be very conservative with these revenues because an act of the state could happen and those revenues could easily be pulled if it's deemed that our jail isn't a suitable place for a particular group of inmates. So that money can easily go away. So that's why we've always been very conservative with that. Even though it has grown, we try to grow it conservatively rather than putting all our eggs in one basket.
Well, it also depends on how many of our folks in Percy County are in jail, and how many, and how soon the ones that are in jail get a trial. So, I mean, I imagine he
There's a
has to
lot
be
of
conservative with that number
Yeah.
because we're only getting it now just because we have some occupancy.
Well, my only question is, if we are getting paid $10 a day, is it costing us $11 to take them? Anybody got any cost figures on, is it something we probably ought not be doing at all?
Would have to answer
I'll
that.
need to bring the sheriff and his jail staff before you to answer those questions, which I'm happy to do. We have another work session coming, so if you'd like me to keep a list of questions you'd like to explore further, we can come back on the 10th with the right people in the room to answer those questions.
Thank you. And a couple questions regarding the actual, some of the departments, one being inspections. On page 77, the Intergov permitting software, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure, this is a new software program that we're proposing for all of development services next year. So this is for planning and zoning, environmental health, GIS, and inspections. And this is, we're hoping, a software that will connect all of their permitting together, will increase some efficiencies within all of those services by allowing our staff to process more of their paperwork out in the field digitally.
And their current software is unsupported at this point, so they have nothing right now. We're kind of flying by the seat of our pants at this very moment in terms of.
We
that
need to
software.
upgrade the software because what we've been using is so outdated and old. So that is a recommendation, and you'll see those costs not only in the inspections budget, but in all those departments that I mentioned will have an associated cost with that software.
Okay,
Is
could you
that
get-
cost in the figures you got here?
Yes, it's already built in each of those budgets.
Can you,
So the cost for the software is in your CIP, and what you're seeing here is the recurring maintenance cost in here. So it's kind of two different places.
does each department have a recurring maintenance cost?
Yes.
Okay, so, and what were those, it was inspections?
It's inspections, environmental health, GIS, and planning and zoning.
Okay.
And they'll all work from that same software program. Some of the complaints that you all have been getting about turnaround times and delays, this is one of the solutions we're proposing to help increase those efficiencies.
So the total operating impact is about $52,000, and the amount in your CIP is $184,000.
Okay.
That help?
All right, on Pat's, page 85. the RGPSED TAP EMP, is that grant money?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to verify that. All right, then planning and zoning, you just answered that question with the contracted services on that. All right, on GIS, page 96, just for my better understanding, I'm assuming this isn't part of the previous software that was brought up. Under your notes, and Heidi, I want to thank you. Your notes on each department really answered a lot of questions, so it saved a lot of time. So I
That was
appreciate.
the partnership between the departments and Laura and the budget
Well,
office.
y'all did an
who-
outstanding job. So people
We
have to
like
listen,
those.
listen to me and ask all these questions. But contracted services, you get comments for due to additional seats for the ARC GIS. I'm just curious what additional seats
What
are.
page did you say that was?
93.
Oh, okay.
You did 96. I was on
Yeah,
fall extension.
me too. The seats were what the term they use for the users.
Yeah, so I think they just needed more user access. So they have software and it's, allocated by the number of people who are using it. So I think that's what the seat is. And I think, that, environmental health got a new, GIS.
They're requesting new devices.
Yeah, new devices, and that's gonna require them also to have access to GIS. Does that make sense? So this new technology
Yes, user role,
requires.
user role might be a better term than
Yes.
seats. Seats is the software developer's term for basically giving an access to a person so that they can use it. Just like we have user roles for Munis, and each person has their unique one. This is 3 additional user roles.
And let's see, economic development, page 95, we've got a increase of 22,500, and this is the target, target industry feasibility study, speculative building feasibility study, website update, and the consultant services. And so that's a total of 47,500. Can I get a breakdown
Mm-hmm.
of that?
Sure thing.
Yes.
And you can just, whenever you get a chance. Okay. And also 97 cooperative extension on our contracted services. Request a breakdown, because I understand that's going towards the full-time extension director and
Yes.
salary increases. I just like to see that
Sure.
broken down.
Sure. So the salary increases is out of our hands, something that the state
Understand.
is passing on to us. But the cooperative extension director is something that the board can decide to do or not. We're currently sharing that position with Granville. So if we take the state's recommendation to have our own director, there is an increased cost with that of about $34,000. If we prefer not to share with Granville, which is what the state is sort of directing counties to do, they've not.
What's
had-
Granville doing?
Our director now that
Mhm.
we share with Granville is going to be Granville's full-time.
Okay.
So currently, the way it's broken down now, he's 3 days there and 2 days here, based off what we pay compared to what they pay.
That's right.
Well, it's 2.5.
We get 2.5
2.5
days of his
here.
time.
It's 50/50.
And that increased cost, I think I said 34, is 32.5 to expand that director position.
Page 111, Sportsplex. And I was looking through my notes, I may have missed it, Heidi, but you've got a revenue anticipated to decrease with the Sportsplex. There on your
Okay.
notes.
Let's see.
Rental revenue.
Mhm.
It's a more realistic revenue projection.
Based on trends.
Because if you recall this year, we've had a lot of rain in the last 12 months or so,
Mhm.
and it basically washed out many of their games, so they did not get the revenue they anticipated current year. So they were trying to do more realistic revenue projections next year, so we could, really understand what we would actually be getting for revenue versus county support of the sportsplex. This year it was skewed because of all these weather, hurricanes, other issues that caused the sportsplex to not be used.
Okay. I didn't see, I may have missed it, but, is that just put into the Parks and Rec, I see it now, the Sportsplex revenue? Okay.
It's in the sportsplex revenue, which is on page 34.
Okay,
Um,
I see it right here.
Yes, kind of in the middle of the page.
Mhm. Well, the revenue was actually from up than what was budgeted, about 20.
I think there's also rental of the sportsplex.
Yeah, that's
that they're
down
also
near the
picking up
Okay.
as
bottom
well.
fourth.
So
Okay.
taking it all together is a little bit low.
Okay. And Heidi, what was, just a, justification, I know I'm talking about our cookie jar page, contingency page 116. I know that's typically where we go to when we need to pay someone, when we want to do a
Yes.
project that's not budgeted in. And, what were, the undesignated, we went from, 610
Mhm.
to 50,000, and what was the justification?
That was us.
So typically, I've been recommending, around 100,000 a
Mhm.
year in contingency. That's your go-to fund for operating costs or one-time expenses in the middle of the year. And then last year, when we made some adjustments to the budget, the cuts that you made, we placed in contingency. So that ratcheted up that balance of that fund to 610. And as you can see, we've hit that pretty hard.
I know, I'm
this year.
just making, the point I was making is, there was only budgeted $50,000 for
That's
this
right.
upcoming year, so just letting the commissioners know that is the.
That's right.
That's the number, $50,000.
Sure, unless you all decide you want to adjust that.
Okay, health revenue, page 121, and this is just a point of clarification. And I'm assuming, transfer from Fund 10, is that pass-through money?
It is not.
Okay,
That's the support from the general fund.
that's the support from the general fund, okay, so, okay. So,
That's the quote-unquote subsidy that you see for some of the other departments that we talk about, how much is required from the general fund to support the operations.
okay, and I was looking under the notes and may have missed it, but, it was a $704,000 increase from the prior year, and I was just wondering if for that total, the transfer from 110
Mhm.
from general fund recommended budget, this year's 1,339,000.
Yes.
As opposed to the previous year, which was 635,000, so
Right.
difference of 704. And I was looking for a breakdown of what that
Sure.
704,000 going to.
Sure.
Which department is that?
Health
This is the health
department.
department, which was a budget that y'all wanted to discuss today, so I have the health director here to answer those questions. If you'll look at the line just under the transfer from Fund 10, that's the fund balance appropriation,
What page are you on?
page 121. Those two lines are sort of a seesaw. So if we are appropriating fund balance, that's the fund balance that is in the health department.
Mhm.
We made a large appropriation last year to spend that down because it was getting high. So you can see that we spent $1 million of fund balance in the current year. So I don't have that same amount available. So this year I'm recommending we would spend $400,000 of fund balance. And then the transfer from Fund 10 is sort of what's left. After I make that appropriation, after we decide how much we're gonna spend of health department fund balance, the remaining amount has to come from the general fund. And so that's why last year that number was very
For
low, 635, and the fund balance appropriation was $1 million.
Yep.
So it's sort of flip-flopping
We relieved the
this
general
year,
fund last year,
Mhm.
or for this year.
current year, yeah.
We don't have that amount left in the health fund to appropriate the same amount, so therefore, Patty's right, it has to come from the general fund to help.
How much do you have, how much do they have in fund balance?
I think I sent that.
You did.
to you.
Let me see if I can get that.
The amount you sent me was 1.1 million.
That's what
That's
I
in-
showed currently and what we were looking at that point in time is that's what was showing on their balance sheet.
Okay, well, what Janet sent me was 2.2 million, so I'm trying to, what is the amount?
Well, I think she's looking at what's restricted for her programs, but I'm looking at just the cash that is showing available in that fund at that point in time. So she's looking at something where she's counting for what she's got to cover her restricted programs with of the fund balance that's there. But I'm looking at what is totally there at that point in time. She may be accounting for revenues that are going to come in, that expenditures that are going to go out. I don't know what that is. I'm giving you what that snapshot picture is at that point in time on their balance sheet that's showing this is how much cash they currently have in this fund.
All right, Janet, can you enlighten us on where the difference is?
Well, currently we have, 3 restricted fund balance accounts that include maternal health, family planning, and child services.
All right, when you say define restricted,
That means that is like Medicaid earnings, for those programs that have gone into the fund balance. That means those programs have earned more than what we expended. And because of the type of revenue that came in, that revenue has to then be spent in those programs. It can't be spent like in environmental health, it has to be spent in those certain programs.
okay,
So, roughly you have about 86,000 in maternal health, 40,000 in family planning, and 43 in child services.
you got, call those numbers out now?
86 in maternal health,
86,000,
yes.
okay,
39.5 in family planning,
okay.
and child services, 43.
All right, that add up to 168.5.
And then we have the, hospice, which is like a 1.8 fund balance.
That jive with what you saying, Amy?
What's your numbers?
She said 1.8 in hospice.
I'm just gonna pull up the balance sheet, because that's where I got the numbers from.
All right, those two figures add up to 1,968,500.
That's a technical difference.
Heidi, while they're looking at that, on
Yes.
121,
Yes.
where is a column that shows actual loss of revenue? So we see the increase, decrease for the adopted, but if you look at that, I'm looking at the hospice and health, and what they adopted to what the actual
Yeah.
revenue was is different.
Yeah.
And then you got some stuff that increased. So if I look at your slide, it
Yeah.
says major decrease in revenue was 883. The total actual just for home health and hospice was 753,304.
Yes.
And then this column with the adopted was 729,419.
There is some variance there, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly what the differences are because those home health hospice revenues were also spread to some salaries,
Their
to
use
the
of- okay.
lease of that building, and those costs don't go away. And so there is just a little bit of variation there. And we also had some savings that we obtained in fiscal year 18 when we started right-sizing this budget in preparation for the home health hospice transition. So the overall is around the 883
Okay.
that we saved, but it is kind of spread out. It's not in one particular line because of the way those revenues were used.
Gotcha.
And oftentimes when we're looking at the revenue for the health department, we won't include the general fund appropriation and the fund balance appropriation, so you can get a true vision of the actual revenues. Does that make sense?
So like the TV fees, I mean, they were small, but what makes us lose something like that?
That's a question for Janet.
The CDC guidelines actually say now to test only high-risk individuals, not every nursing student or someone of that nature. So we're following those guidelines, and so to be more realistic, that's why we changed those. And Durham County has also followed that same recommendation, so health departments are starting to see that.
The difference between her projection and mine is looking at last year's fund balance, what we recognized in the health fund balance, for fiscal year ending 2018. She's looking at those balances and looking at what is restricted and what is not. I'm taking those balances and adding in what she's received this year minus what she has paid this year so far. And so that's why my figure is much lower, because I'm giving you a current, cash balance in their fund, whereas she's looking at what was recognized with the audit at that fiscal year ending.
That doesn't make sense. Cash is cash to me.
No.
It's when the picture's taken.
She's giving you what her fund balance was and at fiscal year ending 2018.
The capper, basically.
Based on, that was the audited figure. What I'm giving you is I'm looking at their current balance sheet. I think when
Like
I was
as of
asked, it was
today?
in May, or actually today it's lower, but at the time I was asked, it was a couple of weeks ago, it's lower because we're not receiving that home health and hospice revenue, but we still have expenditures, so it's caused their balance to come down. So what I gave you was what we actually had at that point in time in their fund. So you would want to go by, that lower amount because they have,
Expensive
they've spent that balance down.
since the audit.
Right
Yeah.
now it's showing 1.4 million.
All right, Janet, why is that not the figure you report to the health board?
That is the figure that we ran on the balance sheet that you had requested out of WINS, so that is the number that I have been reporting. That's the balance sheet that runs out of WINS.
Yeah, but that's not a running balance.
Right, that's a point in time.
That's a year old.
Yeah. So, this is balance sheet. I don't know if you can see it. If I can make it bigger.
Have you ever seen his emails? You gotta make it this big.
I'm trying.
My computer doesn't.
You
Make
see-
sure y'all can see them.
You see all these fund balance?
Mm-hmm.
These are all their fund balance reserves. And so you see there's a big 1.8 million, 85,000. All of those were the ending amounts that we had at fiscal year ending 18. What I'm giving you is this total. Because this total, this 1.4 million, are all of these fiscal year.
That's the current balance.
Uh-huh, that includes all of these fiscal year ending 18 balances, plus the revenue that they've received,
minus the expenditures they have paid out. So that's why this is a current year-to-date total. These are the figures that she reported, that were reported in the audit as of fiscal year ending 18. That make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
what I wanna know is why the health board's getting bad figures.
They're not, they got the balance sheet just as printed as what's shown.
Yeah, but it's not a current balance. It's a year-old figure. Why would we wanna look at that?
It was run May 21st, 2019, is how Munis shows it. Is the sheet that I would distribute to the board.
Well, obviously Munis is not up to date. Okay. Carry on.
Oh, and, and just from my understanding, the fund balance appropriation for the health department, is showing 0 spent. You understand what I'm saying? Under the actual, you got a 0.
For fiscal year 18 last year?
Yes, mm-hmm. And it's.
Yes, we didn't spend any of the fund balance last
Okay, I
year.
just wanted to
Grew
clarify
it
that.
in the
It
next
says
year.
It's a budgetary account only.
Yeah, you're never gonna see an actual fund balance used there, however, we can make that calculation for you. It is simply, if we don't have the revenues to support the expenditures, then you'll see a decrease in our fund balance. But in terms of what's actually in the accounting line, you won't see I gotta pull $5,000 from fund balance to write that check. You won't see that in the units, but we can calculate the usage for you, and that's part of what the auditors do for you every year as well.
But the 400,000 that's recommended goes into the current expense budget, correct? For
What that is a pledge that we're going to use fund balance, 400,000 of their fund balance, the amount of money that's in their fund balance. But you're just not gonna see any actual transactions because it's just a budgetary account.
It's a placeholder.
It's just a placeholder. You're only gonna see the use or surplus of fund balance when the audit is done at the end of the year. When
Okay.
the numbers stop moving, that's when you can see if we actually used some of that fund balance or if we actually added to their fund balance.
okay.
We're projecting to use less because they actually had a use of fund balance. And we feel like they're going to have a use of fund balance this year. So that's why we're pledging less. than-
At that 1.4 million you just showed me, is that the current balance?
That is the current, that was May. That was the end of May.
Okay. All right, so you got a current balance of $1,495,000. Is that what it was?
1,435,000.
35, okay.
Let's see.
Now, they'll have possibly revenues come in, June and July for more June. That may cause that number to go up, but they also have expenditures left in June that will
Draw
cause
down
it to
some of it.
fluctuate. So it doesn't mean that we're gonna have 1.4 million at the end of the fiscal year. It's just, that's what it is at this point in time.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to decide what placeholder we're gonna use.
Okay.
Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah, that's what we do. That's why you pay us.
All right.
Give you our best estimate.
Heidi, social services.
Sure.
And so you explained the fund balance appropriation, same way it's being used for the
Absolutely.
health department, okay?
Yes.
That answers that question with them.
Yes, both of those departments have a lot of grant revenues coming in, and so we always put a fund balance placeholder to balance that budget, knowing that there's some variability of timing for receiving those grant funds.
All right, so, but the inter-fund transfer from Fund 100, that's right above, at the
Yep.
very bottom, at the bottom. Is that pass-through or not pass-through? Like,
Not pass-through.
Not pass-through.
That's the number I've been trying to get you to understand all this years, that we don't put all that money up there at DSS. that's your county pie chart right there.
What'd you
I'm so
say?
glad you brought it up.
That's the general fund support, okay.
And we will change
Let me
that.
circle this and write this date down.
I think it does cost some.
Kyle gets it today.
It's a good change,
We'll make the
131.
change in the title so you understand that that's general fund
Great idea.
support line.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why we hadn't thought of that before now.
That's what it costs the county.
June 4th.
So for the increase, so coming from our fund balance,
Well, we're,
From your general fund.
from the general fund, from our general fund, Miss
Yes.
said the word, so we've got an increase of 941,000.
Right, similar
right.
issue with
Yep.
DSS. We've had some challenges in programs, revenues,
Mhm.
and having to, we spent a lot of their fund balance down as well. We hit a big chunk of it this year. So again, I'm pulling back on that because I'm seeing that they're having some constraints. So we're saying we're not gonna appropriate as much of their fund balance, which means that we have to pull the rest of it from the general fund to support the expenditures.
What's in their current fund balance?
I don't know,
municipal cooperative, we'll get that for you in just a minute.
Let's see.
this will be as of the end of May. So $3,238,453.
Can you say that one more time, please?
I'm sorry, I can't read it. It's
Sorry.
$3,230,453. Now, they have a much larger budget to cover.
I understand.
So,
Yeah,
I wouldn't want you to compare that to the health budget.
okay. Okay. Who wants to go next?
You through?
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Okay.
One more about, what was the total for, the amount for the cell phone appropriation for the changeover, Heidi?
Give me a second, I gotta pull my email on that. I don't have that figure in front of me. If y'all wanna keep moving, it's gonna
Go
take me a
ahead.
minute to find that.
All right, let me take a poke at it.
Okay.
When I was asking a minute ago about the priorities, over and above what we're looking at here, I think one thing that I learned as being head of the EDC was that that particular department has been underfunded. Well, I take it back. It's been funded primarily through the clawback that we had with force protection. All right, now the county did put in $250,000 this past year, I think. But that's gonna take some money to complete the application with Army Corps of Engineers on the mega site. Right now, it looks like it's gonna be somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000 to $100,000, but that's not gonna be the end of the expenses. What you've got in the current budget is $251,000, which is operating expenses. It would be my suggestion that we increase that budget by $250,000 to give them some working capital so that they can complete the mega site. Once you complete that, then you gotta start marketing it. So there will be, if we're not gonna fund that particular account, we really don't even need the place. So we either gotta provide it or look other solutions. Also, one thing that keeps hitting us in the face when we try to recruit somebody is we don't have rainy day fund, I guess, to call back on. We've been assuming that we could go to the fund balance and get it there, which I guess we can. But I think it's time that we started designating somewhere around $1 million a year for a water and sewer. And I would also like that to include broadband. We've got a water and sewer fund. I would like for that to include broadband, because I think one thing that we probably would be wise to at least investigate is the possibility of tying that mega site into the Virginia broadband system. Now, my logic for that is you're about 12.5 miles from the Virginia line. If our site offered connection to the Virginia cable and the North Carolina cable, you've got redundancy that most people that are going to be looking at that site are looking for. They want redundant power. They want to make sure they got water. And Microsoft has already built a $1 billion project, or whatever it cost, up on 360, I think it is, up in Boynton. Anyway, they've got, from what I understand, they've got projections to build 28 of those. And if we could tie into the Virginia line and offer them the same service they're already getting, and have North Carolina also, I'm just hoping that we could maybe intercept 4 or 5 of those data centers and bring those to our mega site. They can be built without, actually probably without even an Army Corps permit, because unless you start disturbing streams and other stuff, I stand corrected on that. But if that were the case, you know, my main goal as commissioner for 4 years is to try to raise the tax base as much as we can. With what infrastructure we already got, plus what we need to start putting in the ground. But from an infrastructure standpoint, I think the southern part of the county is certainly easier sale, but that's where we got the least water and sewer. Got water, don't have sewer. But anyway, I just think it's prudent for the county to start setting aside some money to be able to address these things. You know, if you get a client or you get a situation where you need $10–12 million for a sewer line, we got to go to the state begging. And I think it's time for us to start gaining a little independence. The next thing that I propose would be for us to start setting funds aside, which I think our consultant will tell us in July, August, whenever we start meeting with them, the funds that we're going to need to pretty much retrofit the school system. The school board is in the process of trying to decide how they're going to approach that. But I think no matter how you look at it, we're going to have to come up with some money. And I think that's another area that we need to start setting aside some funds to just start preparing. I mean, we can wait another year if you want to, but all it does is just put us that much further behind. Now, I'm going to make a statement here that's probably going to offend some people, but it is what it is. The commissioners are responsible for funding the public school system. Now, but when the legislature mandates that any capital funds have to be shared with the charter schools, then our responsibility is going to start being diluted by whatever that amount turns out to be. And it's my opinion that I think we ought to get ahead of that as much as we can, and that would be my reason for starting to do something this year. I don't know how long it's going to be before they start mandating that all monies be divided equally. But if you compare the conditions of our schools and the conditions of the charter schools, the county schools have a long ways to go before they catch up. And I think it's prudent for the county to look after their responsibility first. And I'll be glad to take all emails and phone calls on that statement, but that's my personal opinion. I think if we can address those three items, however we arrive at how we fund them is certainly optional. Like I said at the beginning of the meeting, we don't have to raise taxes at all if we go through our budget and see if we're spending the money that we need to spend wisely. And then the money that we're not required to spend, is that as important as we thought it was, or do we need to realign that and put it somewhere else? It's been my contention all along that we have reached a point where we either got to raise taxes or do away with services. And I think we're at that point where we're going to have to do a combination of both possibly. Now, with that said, I'll certainly open the floor to any comments, suggestions. You know, we don't have all the answers, but we are trying to pursue the right ones.
I want some discussion on the hangar at the airport. I've got a friend that has 2 planes in Raleigh, and he knows someone that I guess was the private part of the partnership in Sanford for those hangars. And I guess it was one of those deals where he built it and he got the revenue for so many years, then it turned over to the county. And I just want to know if where's the airport commission on that, the operator, us? I mean, wow.
Yeah. We've had some discussions to consider doing the private route where we have a private investor come in, build the hangar. The offset of that is that we don't have the control in terms of who rents that hangar. There'd be a revenue sharing, and we would lose,
So
the
give me a
bulk
little
of that.
discussion on that. Why would we want control of who rents it if it's rented and at a fair market price?
Do you want to talk about that, Sybil? I know we had several meetings with the private investor and with Bill Tugas, our airport operator, and so
Bill, I guess, sets the rates for the current hangars, and so I guess there's some concern that if a private person came in, they could set their rates lower, and that could pull away some of the rental from the current provider, Bill. So just, those are issues.
Yeah,
you
but
just have to
we're looking at
consider.
building one because everyone's telling us that no one has any, and so we're
Yeah.
anticipating building one and filling it up. So
Yes.
if that
Yes.
is the case, that means it's spots open on bills that are at a higher rate that obviously somebody should take.
Sure, yeah, and I mean, that varies with the market, and so it's really a control situation where it's nice to have it under a single point of control, and Bill is someone we have a good relationship with, we know, he's a known entity. Whereas a private provider, we do get the benefit of not having the risk, the capital risk. But we're not sure, exactly how that relationship is gonna work. It's something you have to really nail down in the contract. So I think, there's pros and cons both ways, and that's really for you all to kind of.
So in the proposed budget, you're just taking that funds out of fund balance building it. We're not borrowing.
that's right.
Pay-go.
And I think the analysis that we did was there was a payback of less than 5 years for that investment, given what you get on your tax base for housing the jets here. So it was a relatively quick payback in terms of the size of the investment compared to other expenditures. So what it will put on your tax roll is really the incentive for building it.
We had to give them some illustration on the money-wise. That hangar would accommodate a $60 million airplane. And so that is the tax base that we're trying to increase. The reason that there are no hangars available, actually, you had quite a few of them at Raleigh-Durham. Well, Raleigh-Durham is basically running them away. And so they're not gonna park those things out in the rain. You can be assured of that. So, how many, well, if we had 5 hangars right now, we'd fill them all up, I guarantee you. And it's because it's that many planes that are looking for somewhere for
Yeah.
shelter.
We
Now,
felt like it
Sanford
was-
has been very successful in drawing these people. They started a long time ago, and you're right. They have done some public-private things. And I have approached a couple of people, local people, to see if they would be interested in it. It all matters, you know, what the numbers look like. If it's a good investment, they'll do it. If it's not, they walk away.
We've had 2 phone calls for folks who are looking for the size hangar that we're planning to construct, so we do feel like there is some demand for that. And when I met with the state, they told me that I would have, their prediction was that I would have our new hangar leased before the construction was complete, and we would be asking for another hangar next year.
Mhm.
And the state is willing to put in money, grant funding, to do the site work preparation on it. So that, I think 3.6 number in your CIP is sort of worst case scenario. We're anticipating it would actually be less than that when we're able to use the grant revenue.
So just give me again the reasoning why we are taking out a fund balance instead of borrowing.
3.6
Funds
isn't,
available.
It just wasn't a
isn't not large
project
enough.
And what we did is we
Finance
also
myself.
cut back on some of the other capital, that we had to make room for that. But it does, because of the quick return on investment, it just wasn't a good candidate for debt. We didn't feel.
I would think though in the past 11 years we were approved some type of borrowing less than 3.5 million. I mean,
Typically.
I'm looking at it, I'm listening to the things that the chairman said he wants to put, and I'm looking at where we reported at the audit with the fund balance, and I'm looking at all these things we want to possibly put money in as kind of like a capital type fund, and I'm wondering why are we drawing down that much out of fund balance? I mean, what's the return? 5 years, 3 years, what?
On the hangar?
Mhm.
I think
About
it's
5 years.
about 4.5 years.
Yeah, I mean,
We're also anticipating possibly having to go into debt for
The
maintaining the
schools.
schools, and that would be quite a chunk. And so with that in mind, we decided not to make a recommendation to do this as yet. Plus the fact that the state may be willing to give us funds on that, made that more appealing as a pay-go option.
So explain to me the partnership between us and the operator. So we put this hangar in and they rent it out. What comes to the county? The rent or a portion or what?
Property
Just
tax.
the
Property
tax.
taxes.
Tax on the
all
place.
ours.
yeah, and that's another reason why we wouldn't wanna finance, because you all have still a discussion to have about how you wanna do it. If you wanna do public-private partnership, or you just wanna do pay-go. So that's something that, you know,
We
we'll
didn't
bring
wanna tie up
forward
the
to you,
financing.
in probably August, or, you know, I know some of you are anxious to move forward on that, so as soon as possible, we'll, you know, bring that option before you.
I mean, we're-
So at the audit, we had 16.2 million in fund balance. What's that today? Since you always tell us that fluctuates and I can't go off that audit number.
I don't know that number until year end. I have no idea. I
So
can only tell you
if our
what
policy is to
what
stay,
recognized.
if our county policy is to stay 18% or above, if we draw that out, I'm kind of, where are we? 'Cause we were sitting at about 32% with that 16.
Yes.
So once we,
We're working with our debt consultants on this. They'll be coming to you with some financial policies probably in August, and we can give you a better idea then of what the fund balance is. It's a picture in time, and so the reason that we had recommended a large appropriation for CIP from fund balance was based on that information we received from the auditor about your fund balance being around 32%. That's why we were comfortable appropriating a large amount of fund balance. Typically, when you do a financing, you're incurring borrowing charges, and so you want to make it as efficient as possible, so you bundle several large projects together. Typically, when you do a financing, something like a 3.6 would not be worth, you know, the fees that you're
There
going
was
to be.
also.
so what about the discussion that I had at the retreat when we looked at some of the debt that we were in, that we only owe a year, 2-3 years, but it's very small amounts. What was the decision on if we just paid off some of that debt?
That's something that the debt consultants are gonna be looking at. You know, we're gonna be having lots and lots of discussions about this kind of long-term view of our debt, moving forward. And
We should have
starting
hired them
September.
in August, so we would have some
Sure.
numbers now instead of after the budget.
We hired them
Well,
as soon as we got numbers from the
yes.
schools and started seeing, you know, what type of capital needs we were facing. We knew that we needed some help shuffling around those revenue sources and payment options on that size projects.
You get almost double with your hangar though, because you get the rent from whoever who's renting the hangar, and then you get the tax on the airplane if it's
That's right.
based here.
That's right.
Is that right?
Yes.
Plus fuel flow.
Yes.
See, that was the whole concept. It's an opportunity for
Right.
government to make money. We don't have many of those opportunities. And the public-private versus us doing it. And I'd asked Heidi to work on that and see what it looked like in the
Yep.
short run, which we did it versus public-private in a 20-year span
Right.
or 30, it could be.
Yep.
But the idea and concept was there to base a $100 airplane here or more.
Now, the one
that's the
thing-
same
Similar-
as building homes or.
Well, it would take a lot of homes to generate that
That's
amount of
exactly
property
right.
tax.
So we get that. So it just seemed a rare opportunity to me, plus the fact that as Chairman Newell has stated, and we've seen that, we've known this since last year, that the big airports, they don't want the smaller ones, so
Right.
they're hopping around to other places, and it just seemed like a good opportunity to.
Well, with that in mind, I think we are wise to go ahead, if we're gonna do this, go ahead and do it now, because we don't wanna give those planes a chance to find a home before we can find them one. That would, if we landed 4 or 5 of those, or hell, 2 or 3 for that matter,
About one,
that would,
50 million.
that would make the star on the map a little bit bigger when people start looking at coming here from California or Arizona or wherever they're flying in from. We just recently changed the name of the airport, hopes of putting a name out there that will make us more recognizable. But nothing beats usage as far as attracting people. If it's being used a lot, it's a good indication that it's a good facility. So anything we can do to increase our plane base and our tax base, I think is good for everybody.
It was-
Yes, Mr. Clayton.
It was an investment in economic development that, in the grand scheme of investing was not as steep as it could have been, with a relatively quick return on that investment.
CIP, which means? Yeah. Let's see your CIP. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Powell, you got something you want to add to us?
Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. My two main things still remain education and economic development. I don't see how you could separate the two. I don't see how we're going forward and be progressive in doing what we're talking about with economic development and basing of an airplane or whatever those might be. And so those things to me haven't changed. Education comes up no matter which corner we turn or where we go. In prospective clients, we're bringing industry in here. It's a top priority once they make a commitment to the county. Would say one thing about what we as commissioners and commissioners past, your allocation to schools, the same dollar goes to charter schools as goes to public schools per child. So, and you do that
That's
by.
on
The per pupil.
operating
Per-
expense, that's
Right,
not
it's
capital.
current expense, I'm not
Right.
talking about capital. That's a whole different venue, totally different. So that's misconceived in the public, I believe, so, whatever a board decides on is divided by the total number of students in the county, and then that's how the appropriations go. I mean, it's very simple math. Total enrollment in the county with charters as well as public, I think it's pretty much about the same. It hasn't changed much in the past few years. Again, total enrollment countywide. Personally, I don't think this board historically has supported education very well, and I'm like you, Chairman Yule, I'll take the emails on it, I guess. But looking back historically, we have not funded public schools adequately in the current expense budget. And maybe a couple examples. One is, I think back in, when was it, we did the person's future in 2010, maybe? Was that about it, or was it prior to that? It was earlier than that. The most mentioned and most focused item in that report was education. From all the different angles that we went to and looked at from that strategic plan. And then that plan ended in 2015. It's all over. It's done and it's gone. During that time, there was very little attention paid to that fact. And I would say in response to the 2010 plan for the futures, school funding went 3 consecutive years flat in response to that plan. Then this board gave a 2% increase in 2013, and so we go over a 5-year period of current expense funding at 2% increase. So what are we doing for public schools? All of our students, I say again, and that includes charters. Again, these are numbers and these are facts. 2015, we did have a 2.3% increase. Then in 2016, we had a 1.3%. And I realized too in there was some capital funds that were put in there, maybe as
For technology.
yeah, for technology, and that was done. Of course, that was needed. We're in a technology age, and then in 2017 we had a flat budget again. So 7 out of 13 years, we've had a flat current expense fund. In 3 of those 13 years, we actually had a reduction in current expense funding. So again, I say historically we haven't done a very good job in funding education, and it is the #1 item when we did the futures. It was the #1 item that was expressed when the EC made its recommendation, which this board did adopt, to hold education as a priority. So, I still think that's the way for us to go if we're going to make a difference as a board, and this board does, or it is the difference maker when it comes to education in Person County. And look back again historically, we had 2 schools, debt that was paid off when Amy might could tell us 2016-17 year.
16.
And that was about a 9% debt. And when that 9% debt went away, it didn't go to school. It didn't go back in current expense. It went someplace else. So again, I just asked the question, where is the support for education for this board? And you might say, look at the numbers. But if we look at total enrollment countywide, it's still maintaining about a status quo there. Thing too about the current expense budget, their expenses go up every year just like the expenses of everybody else that we're talking about here. They have mandated increases and mandated requirements that they have to pay. And when they do that and they have a reduction or no increase in current expense, that's where that money would come from, then they have to rob Peter to pay Paul. And I contend that the ones that suffer there are the students. When they don't have what they need in a classroom, they don't have adequate funding for the teaching staff, and they're looking at a reduction of potentially 31 people. I don't know it will pan out that way or not. So I think it's extremely important that we consider the school's request and support them as we go forward. And, you know, again, I think we as commissioners need to pay attention to what the public says. And public is saying we want the best possible education we can get for our children in the county. But those two things are the primary concerns with the economic development in schools. I think if we do our due diligence and do our job as commissioners, we can meet the recommended budget without a tax increase. That's all I got.
To me, this is sounding more like a board retreat where we're giving you direction to bring back a budget. But we had this discussion to talk about our priorities and what we would like to see done. And we all, I thought, did that at the library this year. And you brought back a budget reflective of our what we told you there. And now we want to go back, or I don't know what we're doing. I mean, it's a little different than budget years in the past, I would say.
Well, you know, I think what we're trying to do is establish what's important to us right now, what needs to be funded as opposed to, you know, the retreat is always a wish list for that to a certain degree, but,
I hadn't said anything, but I will if you would like for me to.
yes, sir.
I'm interested in the water and sewer fund, and one of my reasons for that is I realize that most of the landfill regulations have been, that the county had any thoughts of, or partner with anybody else. That's a done deal, because states changed all those regulations. So the landfill's that's going to be there for the life of the landfill, or what that might be. And I think you heard the speaker last night point that out at our public hearing. So I think that we need to set up, you said a water and sewer fund a while ago, that's fine. I think that's what we need, but it needs to be something that nobody can come back and rob down the road. That needs to be some type of utility type fund. Because I know that
If
it'll
we
take.
put money in there, can it be used for anything else?
So,
It can't be used for anything else unless the board redesignates it to come out and be used for something else. It would have to be special board action to do that.
If we can't tie the hands of future boards. can we?
Right.
I understand that, but I understand also if you put it in a utility fund, it has more strings attached to it. It's harder to get it out, I hope.
It's you can't make
It's not
that
an enterprise fund.
because it's not totally supported by fees.
There are no fees.
That's the only way that can be
Then,
designated as that fund.
I know that it would take $14.4 million to run a water line to the landfill in that area down there. If you went down there and circled that landfill, it'd take roughly that amount of money. We're not in the water and sewer business, but we're in the business usually. When we get involved in it, we install it and turn it over to the city when they get through. So you're talking about that amount of money just for a water line to the landfill area, and I don't care what they tell you, that they're responsible, this, that, and the other. You still see appropriations for cleaning up landfills in different places around the state. I just saw one. They tell you how wonderful the landfill is up there at the Motor Speedway at Concord, Charlotte Motor Speedway. They tell you all of that, and then you see in the state budget where somebody stuck money in there for this city up there of Concord to clean up something that was going on with that landfill up there. So, you know, don't ever think that you won't end up being responsible for it somewhere down the road, even if they do own it. So, you know, I think we need to be prepared for that. Also, some of that money can be used for exactly what you're talking about with the mega sites. So I think we need to establish that fund. Manager's budget, Mr. Powell was talking about with the schools. I think she pretty well covered the schools in her budget. If you do the water and sewer fund, you can call it the environmental fund. Call it whatever what you want to call it, as long as we do that. If you're going to do that, and you're looking at what you need to do this year, you know, you got a compression study in for the employees. You need to consolidate all that together and get that out of the way. And I've fussed ever since they deleted the environmental health specialist over there. You had the economy picking up and the building picking up, and you tied the hands of the people that get out there to get it done first. I mean, they need that inspector position over there keep the ball rolling. You know, when you come in here, somebody's trying to get a permit, they need to be able to get the permit in a reasonable length of time. And if you look and have any access to the ads at all over North Carolina now, they were laying them off in the recession. Now they're trying to hire them back with all of the requirements and the qualifications for these people. You don't get them back overnight. If you get trainees in there, you got to train them. So you know you're already behind when you start doing that, and then you contract them with somebody else trying to get it done, and you're paying more. So that leads down the road to a whole bunch of issues. And you cut a building inspector position out a couple of years ago, just as we picking back up. You know, you need that back in your budget. I see she's already got in the budget the extension director for Person County, biggest industry in the county. Here we are with a part-time extension director. The biggest enterprise in the county is agriculture. And I think it was a shame when we had to cut that to a part of a position, but you know, we got a chance now to get it back. The state's gonna fund part of that, so that was one reason it was stuck back in there. When you look at your list and you look at my list, and you know, the manager gave you a budget with your school funding in it. You got to put some money aside somewhere here in a capital fund for the school construction. And you know, I don't know what the state will do with that. They over there playing around with the lottery funds we're supposed to be getting that. You know, you put the blame anywhere you want to, but if you go around and look, when the Democrats were in control of the General Assembly, every time they got a chance, they pushed it down on the local government to pay for it. So that's why we're doing the current expense that Commissioner Powell was talking about. That should be the state's responsibility, and it is the state's responsibility, but they don't take it. Then when you got the Republicans in charge over there, they still pushing stuff down on the counties. You go look, every time you turn around, there's other things that they don't want to pay for on the state level, and they push it down onto the counties to pay for. So, you know, the counties have got to look out for themselves, and I think that's what the Association of Commissioners has tried to do. But so we don't know where we're going to be with some of these funding options, and you're not going to know because they will never get that state budget adopted before July the 1st. So we're kind of playing in the blind with some of this. So you're not going to get so much of the lottery funds unless somebody changes the formula for the schools like it was designed to be to start with. So, you know, you got to look at that. So I agree with what you're saying about the budget stuff. I agree with what Mr. Powell is saying, but I don't think you're going to get through it without some type of tax increase if you do it that way. You've got to have it to fund it. You hadn't done it in, what, 12 years? You know, I was on this board when the tax rate was lowered from 67 to 65. You've heard me say this before. And then 2 years later, we had to raise it to 70 cents to where it's at right now to catch back up. So, you know, if you're going to do it, do it. If you're not, then don't. But, you know, if you're going to do it, make it an adequate amount to cover what you got to expend for. And I'll use that example again. You can go in, 5 years ago, you could go in the store and buy one of those little nutty bars for a quarter. You can go in there today, it's 50 cents. Things have gone up. It's just the way it is.
The compression study Jimmy mentioned, you have it in a 3-year.
That's right. I have it recommended to implement it on 1/3 this year, 1/3 the next, you know. And then the amount in the budget, in this upcoming budget, is $216,000. The total amount to implement the full study is $726,943. So that's a difference of $510,000. It's $510,618 is the difference that you would need to fully implement that.
How do you normally give a sheet out for the vehicles, or, you know, typically vehicles that has the year, make, model, and mileage on that for the vehicle? I think it was 7 new ones that are in this year's
yeah.
budget.
Let's see, I'm recommending 8 vehicles.
8 vehicles.
I don't typically give that out unless it's requested, if
Okay.
you guys want to look at that. So I received a request for 15 vehicles, so I have recommended 8 of those 15. 6 for the sheriff, 1 Pat's van, and 1 truck that's a replacement in the inspections department.
Can you provide the mileage for the for in year?
Sure, all of these that are recommended had exceeded the policy that the board adopted in terms of both age and mileage, but I can get you the actual details on those if you'd like. I think we were on a rotation with the sheriff for 8 vehicles a year, so we have reduced that to 6 in the upcoming budget. The PATS van, as you know, is a small county portion, 10%, and then the inspections is the only other one left. So your vehicle cost next year is $215,000. Contrast that with your current year, you're spending $549,000. So quite a reduction there. I do have the cell phone costs pulled up if you'd like me to give those to you,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner, per year. You're currently spending about $122,000. And next year, the new cost is $144,276. So that is a difference of $22,590. And let's see, we went from I don't have the exact number.
So I want to bring up the volunteer fire departments real quick.
Okay.
So I want to talk a little bit about Woodsdale Fire Department. Page 81, you'll find the funding for the fire department. I don't know, 3 or so years ago, we increased Woodsdale's funding because currently we had this system. One station got, I'm gonna use it, 40 grand.
Sure.
2 stations got 80 grand. Woodsdale has 2 stations, which was their argument at that time. They got it certified through the state as a substation, so we increased their funding. Some argument from some of the other fire departments is that they're so close together, they don't cover a actual new 6-mile radius. They're kind of overlapping, so to speak. And given some of the revelations that we've had this year with Woodsdale and the fact that I don't think they've done any fundraising at all this year, that I would recommend cutting them $30,000. But I would want that money to stay in the fire department type account type of thing. I'm not saying cut it and spend it somewhere else.
Okay.
We have some no man's area out in the, I guess I want to call it the Person County, Leesburg side of Person County, and out toward Gorton Road, out in that area.
Sure.
And we've heard some interest in Castle County, possibly putting a station that's close enough to the county line that will benefit and cover some of our citizens in this county, very much like Samora does. And that leaves some money there in case they do something like that and we decide to fund them in a half portion the way we do Samora.
Got a question though, with the fire tax. I thought that money was guaranteed. It had to go to the fire departments. It had to be allocated that year to fire departments. I didn't think that we would be able to put aside it into a separate fund. I thought it had to go to the.
The fire tax is a separate fund, can only be spent for
I don't want
VFD
that 30 to
funding.
come out of that.
But you don't have to spend the entire amount collected. Remember, there's an
We
amount
set what's
that
collect,
each.
once we collect it, we set what we give out of that.
I understand that, but the whole point of the fire tax was guaranteed money that the fire departments know that they are getting that money. That's the way it.
Come July 1, Woodsdale will know they're getting
Okay.
$59,298.
So that would create a surplus of sorts in that fund if you're not appropriating the full amount that you would be collecting, which is, I think, what Commissioner Jeffers is suggesting, that it would still be used for VFD funding, but not necessarily to
Can
the.
you create a capital account within that fund?
I don't think you can create a capital account on a tax. No, that
No,
would
it
be an
just go-
internal fund.
It would just go into the fund and it would help to fund future years.
They'd have their own fund
allotments.
balance then.
It would, yeah,
Okay.
it would
Something
roll,
different.
roll for year to year.
That's right.
All right, now since we're on Woodsdale, how do they stand as far as their,
They were approved.
They
They passed their
the last
inspection,
inspection.
probably 2 weeks ago. I
All right.
sent out a notice to all of you.
Now, the main goal of the fire tax is to make it pay for itself.
Well, it doesn't pay for itself.
It will if it gets a rating thing, and if we gonna have to mandate that.
The fire tax, you have a budget for what you're appropriating for each VFD. And so the amount of the fire tax is equivalent to give them the amount of funding. They're not really.
What he's saying is we're getting out of general funds so the taxpayer can see that what they're paying on that tax is going to those fire departments.
Right, it is increasing the transparency of those
Right,
funds.
of those funds.
That's
Yeah,
true.
but the goal is, and what we're gonna have to reinforce is, we need to get the ISO ratings down like Castle County did.
Right.
And if you get Person County down to a class 4, which from the man from Raleigh was saying that we should, no place should be above a 7.
Right.
And most of that can be achieved mostly through paperwork, through volunteer fire departments. But I think we need to attach some conditions to any monies that they get to, if you got it down to a class 4 and that, just say you had a 5-cent tax, you're gonna raise the man's property taxes by roughly $150, $200, but you're gonna save them $400 on homeowners. So that's where I'm talking about it paying for itself. There's no reason that taxpayers shouldn't come out ahead. Now, albeit, the citizens need to understand that that process takes a couple of years, sometimes 3. Now, some of the stations have already started doing that. Actually, some more could not achieve that without the help of CEFO. CEFO had the equipment that made them recommend meet the requirements. CEFO has 2,000-3,000 gallon tank trucks. And on a rural situation, it's response time and how much water you can get to the fire. So, if it weren't for CEFO, I'm not sure Samora could have met their requirement. But I think the departments are learning that they got to learn to work together. And I think we need to arrange this such that they not only understand it, but they do it. So that would be my suggestion as far as the.
Well, part of
fire
my
tax
suggestion with Woodsdale is something that Commissioner Powell added to the contracts was discussing about their fundraising, that just because you're getting this increased funding doesn't mean you just sit back on your heels and wait for it to come in. And it's my understanding they did no fundraiser at all this last year. And to speak to what the chairman is speaking on, I serve on the Fire Chiefs Committee, and they are doing a lot better job at working together and trying to help each other. And there's a Facebook page, I think it's Person County Fire or something like that, but they're announcing on their county-wide ISO trainings. A lot of that has to do with some of the water points and things like that. So if you live in a district and you have a pond, talk to your volunteer fire department and give them access to use that as a water point. I know that they are updating right now their mutual aid agreements with Cluster Springs, just crossing the Virginia side, and so they're looking at all of that, what they need to do, and actively working at lowering those ISO ratings,
They are working on it.
getting that paperwork that they need
Well, you
to
know,
show
one
to the
thing
state.
that they could look at, one of the biggest determining things is how much water can you get to the fire. And if we were maybe to take that $30,000 or $40,000 and buy or at least start paying for a truck that actually went to all of the fires, and what that truck would provide would be, you could throw the intake into any pond you wanted to. Most of your standpipes out in the county have to be a certain elevation before the truck can actually use them. If you had this particular vehicle that went to every fire that was necessary, I mean, if they had a fire hydrant, they wouldn't need it, but anything in the county, then that particular, I mean, you take a hose and stretch it, put it in the pond and stretch it 1,000 feet and it'll pump a lot of water and it'll keep the trucks full. Something like that. Another thing that I've been talking to some people about, and I'd like to see the people around the lake pay for this, not the county. But if you had a couple of fireboats, one on each side of 57 Bridge, because you can't go under it, that would, the particular vehicle I've been looking at, you could pump 1,000 gallons a minute, just about on any incline. So that in and of itself, I think, would be attractive to the people at the lake. So, you know, you've got some different, let's see, on that particular vehicle, I think you were looking at, well, I don't want to quote a figure because I don't really remember, but it was certainly reasonable. And, you know, for somebody to get the ISO rating down on $1 million house, comes into play pretty good. So, I'm not real sure who's going to lead the parade on that organization. You got any ideas, Ray?
Well, I will say Wayne Wren, who works for the city fire department. He's like a battalion chief. He's been the president for the past few years. He's done a great job at, I think, bringing them together and getting them thinking alike and how they can accomplish this. He's very well respected with the state fire marshal's office, and they just re-elected him again as president. And I think he's doing. He'll be a good point of contact for us, and he's doing a good job. And he brings in also that the value of being a city employee, because we obviously contract them to provide a lot of services, and has a lot of knowledge.
Will the rest of them follow him?
They have so far.
All right, do they have a plan in place to get the ISO ratings down?
Probably what they're doing now is setting up these county-wide trainings, some of the trainings that they were lacking individually, that will go towards lowering that ISO rating. But a lot of, like you said, a lot of it is paperwork. And that was another reason when we were dealing with Woodsdale and their lack of reporting and the things that put them into jeopardy of losing their certification, was we were able to look at some of their call volume and some of their response times, and I think for 2 months they only hit 2 calls. I mean, the call volume is very low for that northern part of the county. So I feel comfortably that they should operate fine with this cut.
Well, the one thing we need to be careful up there is a good portion of our industry is in Woodsdale Fire District, and if we get any new people up there, they're not going to come to a Class 10 environment.
Right.
So,
and I would tell you that's the importance of having our contract with the city, because that is a low population area out in the northern part of the county, and them in Triple Springs, I would say, probably have the most issues of filling calls during the week, having someone to respond.
all right, Mr. Clayton, you got anything else you want to add? All right, Mr. Jeffers.
Well, I listened to all of y'all, and I hear what Gord said, I hear what Kyle said, and I know we probably would like to do it without a tax increase, but you know, we've gone 12 years. I was at a meeting this past week with commissioners from all across the state, and I hardly heard anyone talk about, if they talked about not doing a tax increase this year, it's because they did it last year. And I think we are one of the few that have been able to hold out for 12 years. Especially given some of the priorities that so many of you all have mentioned this morning that you would like to do. I don't know where that money would come from. I mean, like you said, unless we do severe cuts to services. I like the idea of increasing the EDC's operating budget. I like the idea of the water sewer fund. I also want to remind us that we voted in a strategic planning session that this county will look at the possibility of doing a YMCA, and I think we understood then that took a study that came out about $25,000.
That's right.
I've told you my idea on volunteer fire departments. I appreciate Commissioner Clay's comments about the compression study. And so, if I can read my chicken scratch, I think if we did anything with the water and sewer fund and the school capital fund, that I'm gonna throw out some numbers. Put 500,000 in each one, take that $1 million out of fund balance. That leaves $250,000 for the EDC operating budget the chairman would like to put there, 25,000 for the YMCA. The compression study with these figures, I put it in a 2-year installment, so I just split that $700,000 figure that you gave me to, so that came out to $363,471.50. The only thing I didn't do was take out, I guess, what you've already appropriated for this year, which was what? For that compression study?
216,000.
200 and what?
216. I have that somewhere. 216,330 is what's currently appropriated for public safety employees. So it's a difference of 510,618 that you would need. Commissioner Jeffers, you said increase the school capital.
Well, not the school capital, I'm talking about creating a separate fund that we would just start placing up.
We are working on that with the debt consultants to set up a new fund, capital investment fund, which will start putting money aside for some of those large school needs.
Okay.
Where's that money coming from?
They are scouring all of our accounts, so we're taking little bits and pieces of things like, I don't know, home health hospice sale, 200,000. You know, small bits as we retire debt, those sort of things, shuffling some things around. So we'll be spending multiple meetings with you all, creating that fund and some seed money to start moving forward on school capital needs.
So with the things that I like, going back to it, EDC, 250,000 operating.
Okay.
The YMCA study, 25,000.
Right.
And doing the compression study in 2 years. So I told you that
2
payment
years.
would be $363,471. So I took out what you already have budgeted.
Okay.
So if I add that to the 250 and the 25, it comes up to 422,141.50. I know we don't have our little chart up here, so we can go back
Are we
and.
ready?
I don't know if we're ready. I'm just throwing out my idea.
Yeah, I got that.
And if you did that, 1 penny on the tax rate generates $447,956. So if we raise the tax rate to 53 cents, you would do those things I mentioned for 422,141.50. Make the difference between whatever that 1 penny. You just put that in contingency, and then you have the 500,000 for the water fund. I would take out a fund balance, and then I guess you're saying that we need to wait or see what the consultants are going to bring to us about setting aside some type of capital fund.
That would be
I
my
heard what Commissioner
recommendation.
Powell said about the schools, but it's hard for me to go against what the superintendent said when he said he's fine with the 896, which represents a 2 cents on the property tax. So if we did these additional things in the operating, the EDC, the YMCA, and funding half the employees on this compression study, we'd be looking at a little under 1 more penny.
Over and above what's proposed.
What's proposed, if you do a 53 cent, if you go 3 cents tax increase.
Do
I
you mean
keep saying
73?
50 because I was
Yeah.
thinking, somebody emailed me about Halifax County and their tax rate is 50.
Okay,
If we go 3
73
cents on the tax, if we increase by 3 cents,
Okay.
you could do those things that I just mentioned. That is pretty much what I heard from you all this morning.
Fire tax.
Leave it as proposed.
So 3 cents would put the rate at 75 cents. Is that what you're
Are you
thinking?
starting- Yeah, are you just saying go from 72 to 73?
No, I'm going
Or
from
saying
70 to 73.
75? Okay.
So I'm already calculating the 2 cents that you got in there for the
Right.
schools, 896.
Got it.
All what I'm looking for is $422,141.50. 1 penny generates $447,956.
So these are-
It's a little bit less as you
I know,
increase the
then a
tax
penny.
rate.
That's
Yeah.
what I said. The difference, put in contingency. Because you went from 100,000 normally to 50,000.
The
And
extra penny will bring you another 438,587.
Yeah, there's.
38. Okay,
there's-
I was just going off what you sent me.
So my penny is based on the 70-cent tax rate. When you start adding pennies, you're losing the first 3
Okay.
months of DMV, so that's some of the
438 what?
variance there.
438,587 additional over the 72 cents.
38. So there's a difference about 16,000 for what I came up with. Now,
It's on the DMV
this is chicken scratch
revenues.
on here. It'd be more accurate if we hit that chart up there, but
Sybil's gonna
I don't know
pull
if
that
we're
up,
ready
I
for that
think.
chart. I'm just throwing that out there. I liked your budget. I think it reflected our priorities that we gave you at the board retreat.
Retreat.
I like that it increased the school's funding by $196,000. It took 2 pennies to do it, but Commissioner Powell has commented enough on that, and I'll concur. He and I both have been a part of boards that, in those years that he mentioned, the school stayed flat. So I concur with him on those comments. I'm happy to fund the schools $896,000 more. Sadly, it takes 2 pennies to do it, but that's where we are when you wait 12 years to raise taxes. And if we do the additional things that I heard a majority of the board say they're in favor of, the water sewer fund, increasing EDC, and the YMCA study, and the compression study, that's that 422, 140, 150 I came up with.
All right, let me open a different discussion now. If we wanted to keep the tax rate where it is, where would we cut?
And Mr. Chairman, I was about to bring up that point. Given the information that was requested by me this morning, I'd like the opportunity to review that at our next scheduled budget session to come up with a counter to where I feel that we could approve a budget without the tax increase.
Well, I would just note that if you do the schools increased funding and the EDC, and that's only half of what, like you said, $1 million for the water sewer fund. I just said 500,000. If you're looking for 1.3 million, yeah, which department you gonna close?
That's what we're getting ready to talk about.
You're gonna close one if you find 1.3 million.
All right, Mr. Perry, you go ahead.
I'm sorry, sir?
He's asking for another work session.
I'm asking, give me time to
Reflect.
crunch numbers and come up with it may be voted down, but we'll have an alternate
Okay.
plan.
Well, just to make the public aware of the subsidies or the funding, whatever description you want to use, the health department is being subsidized, I guess. Add in lights and water and insurance and building cost, you're looking at probably in the neighborhood of $600,000. Now, if that wasn't called Person Industries and was called a recycle center, I'm not sure the affection would be quite as attached to it. The city had it for a while and they finally decided that they couldn't sustain it. And we put quite a bit of money in that place over the years. I think you've got the library that basically requires $400,000 of funding. Senior center is another $88,000. Now, if you attach how many people these departments touch, may give you some bearing as to the necessity of possibly keeping them. The health department, I'm not real sure how many people. I know certain parts of it used to see quite a bit of people. Since Obamacare has come into play, they don't see near as many people. They go see a doctor instead of coming to the health department. And so for us to continue to subsidize it with and I certainly stand corrected on some of these assumptions, but it's hard for me to see us putting that kind of money into a situation that, by their figures, average seeing 13 people a day. Now, they've got some other departments that are certainly much more utilized, WIC program being one that comes to mind. And you've got some other things that, I mean, they have about 10, 11 things that we as a county, through the health department, have to provide by state law. So I can't really put a figure on that. 13 is certainly misleading in some respect, because I don't know exactly what the total number would be. Parks and Rec, you can imagine how many people use Parks and Rec. So, you know, when you start justifying expenditures, if you break it down to a per person usage, I don't know if we got the numbers to give us any kind of reflection on that. Person industries, you've got basically you've got a structure there that benefits less than 100 people. Unfortunately, it takes about 65 people to look after the 100. You know, the business model itself, where there's no reflection on anybody, it's just matter of fact that you've got roughly $600,000 that's benefiting 100 people. I mean, if it didn't exist at all, how can you, what would you have left over? And that figure has been more in the past. I know when I was commissioner before, the last year I was here, that figure, not counting your lights and everything, was about $750,000. It has come down some. They have downsized, and I commend them for trying. They are fighting a losing battle simply because of the supervision that's required to operate a situation under those conditions. And so, you know, that's just 3 or 4 things that, you know, if you want to start cutting, I guess we could certainly look at justifying what we do spend. And as I said before, I think this is a year where we either raise taxes or do away with services, and I think it's going to wind up being a combination of both, and I think that's the responsible thing to do. I question how many of these things would be in existence if the general population knew exactly what it was costing. So that's something that I think the population as a whole needs to be made aware of. And I know it may be opening up a can of worms, but you know, this is a poor county, and for us to just start raising taxes on a lot of people that can't afford it is irresponsible. So you know, we have to be able to live within our means, and there's no doubt that over time things get excessive in certain areas, and you know, we can correct some of these figures. Parks and Rec, for one, you could correct some of it with the adjusted fee schedule. You know, there's some other ways of approaching this. Inspections, for instance, I think we generate somewhere in the neighborhood of $400,000 in revenue, and we spend about a little over 500. So, you know, is it the responsibility of the population as a whole to subsidize somebody building a house? Now, you know, I'm not real crazy about raising fees, but I do think that people ought to pay their own way. So, and I'm not making any motions. I'm just trying to express my opinion and my thinking. And you know, I look at this pretty much as a business decision. That's the only kind of decisions I know how to make. That's where I'm trained. That's what I'm used to making. And having to make if I'm gonna stay in business. And, you know, indirectly, that's what we are as a business. We're trying to keep things in order so that the citizens can afford them. You know, everybody's got a wish list. We've had a lot of conversation. I'm sorry that the young fella died at the lake. I'm sorry anytime that somebody gets drowned at the lake, but you've probably seen some emails and Facebook and Channel 5 and 11 where, you know, they're trying to blame the county for his death in so many words. So, you know, I learned how to swim in a pond. I think most everybody at this table did.
I didn't. I may be the only member on the board that can't swim.
Well,
But we had to go to Stony River to go to a public pool. Still do.
well, you know, here again, it's, what we're looking at here is a matter of priorities and putting them in order. And see which, in my opinion, see which one would show the best return for the taxpayers. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that if we can keep economic development going, and we are getting to the point now where I think we will start reaping some rewards off of our efforts at the mega site. My main objective with the water and sewer fund is to start putting some money aside to develop the south side of town. And economic development itself needs some funding just so that they can exist. And so I've preached long enough. Anybody got anything else they want to add?
No, sir. Just speaking of Vice Chairman Jeffers, we were looking at the 11th as a possible next budget work session.
You have one scheduled for Monday the 10th.
We did? Okay, okay.
But if you'd like to change that, you could.
Could we change it to the
11th?
11th?
What time are you thinking?
9 o'clock, be fine.
That works.
But I appreciate the chairman's comments. Certainly, anytime you're looking at going the hard route as opposed to the easy route, there's always some pain that's involved with it. So I appreciate his comments.
So
So work session 11th.
the 10th is off.
It sounds like we're changing from the evening of the
1.3 is a pain. That's amputation.
The 11th at 9 o'clock has been suggested, which is just fine. We can meet in here.
Phone with me.
All right, are we adjourning or recessing?
We will need to recess, please, to June
Why are we not doing
11th
it
at
to
9
10?
a.m.
I guess Kyle has conflict.
We want it on the
I
11th,
thought she already had it.
Tuesday.
Yeah, we can make that change.
And at what time?
And Jimmy, if you've got a conflict, just
I don't know. I don't
9
know
a.m.
the calendar.
9 a.m. on the 11th is being suggested.
What time?
9 a.m. is what Commissioner Puryear has suggested. So I have sent you the economic development contracted services breakdown, and I
Okay.
will get the other information from my running list out to all of you sometime this afternoon.
Okay.
Are there any other budgets specifically you'd like to discuss on the 11th so that I can have the right people here, or?
I think we'll probably end up having a vote. You know, you got a raise proposal and.
Okay.
Who said I made a proposal? I didn't make a budget.
Sounded like a proposal.
I
You
told
just didn't
you.
have the sheet up.
I told you for everything that you all said here, I spoke last. Everything that you all said you all wanted to do and support it, I just put it to a number factor, so what you had to do.
I said-
3 cents, 73 cents would be the tax rate to do all of what you want to do, or you come here and find $1.3 million worth of cuts. I simply stated the facts. If I make a proposal, I'll make a motion.
Okay.
You didn't hear my suggestion. You didn't count for that.
All right, now since you did make that, are you gonna make that a motion as far as Woodsdale? That doesn't need to be part of
I
the
mean,
budget. Or we need to just
It
do
does need,
later
because of,
second?
yeah, but
It
we'll
would be-
we'll put all that in there whenever we agree on whenever there is a motion for budget ordinance.
Okay.
Understood.
All right, anybody else? If not, we stand in recess until 9 o'clock on the 11th.
Thank you.
Thank y'all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for your work on that.